comparative. He never said this is forever. Forever means all the generations coming ahead. And also Moses said in Deuteronomy 18 chapter verse 15, the Lord, your Lord God will raise up your prophet like me among from your brothers. You must listen to him. So whatever he says, we should listen. Whatever the new prophet brings, Lord, we should listen to him. And also you never mentioned in your speech about Prophet Ishmael. When the Genesis it is clearly mentioned about Ishmael. In Genesis chapter 17, 4, 17, 20, 21, chapter 13 and 18. And also it is mentioned about Jesus also in Isaiah 7, chapter 14. It says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be the child and will give birth to a son, and he will be called Emmanuel.
I'm going to work backwards with your questions. And I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can. And I want you to be also. And if I don't answer a question, tell me. And you know, my old age, I probably, by the time I answer the first part, I'll have forgotten the other one, so you'll have to remind me. So, when you shared with me the quote from Isaiah 7:14, this is a demonstration of the problem of trying to understand what God said. The problem is translation, because many of the translations we know in English today go all the way back to the King James Version. Even though the King James Version probably reflected the best English knowledge of its day, I guess King James gathered how many scholars together? You know? A whole bunch of the top scholars to do a translation. But suffice to say that this was a translation out of an Anglican Christian world that used not only the original Hebrew, but used, in this particular case, other texts. And the particular text I want to refer to is the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation. In Hebrew, for what you read as a virgin in the English text, there are two words, Alma and Betula. They're two different words. Greek has only one word. A young woman is automatically a virgin. But the Hebrew has two words. The Hebrew word used in the Hebrew text of Isaiah is a young woman. In no way is it a virgin. But when it is then translated into a language where only one word means both, and then that translation is translated yet again, it also is like making a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, so by the time you get the 10th Xerox copy and you're trying to make out, not sure what this word is. And this was only, and again, if I have any of this wrong, please correct me. So in that specific case, as we read the text, there's no problem with this. Beyond which it was supposed to be a prophecy that would be fulfilled at that time, not a prophecy that would be fulfilled hundreds of years later. So this has nothing to do, as we understand the text, with Mary or with Jesus. So that was, for me at least, an excellent example of how translations, particularly now into English from other translations, can be more confusing than helpful. Beyond that, because the translators of King James were all Christians.
But this is same in all versions. King James, New English, International Version, everything I checked.
No. So that, and I should have brought my new the new Revised Standard, but if I were to share with you Isaiah 7:14.
I checked biblical.com, it gives all versions, like 10 or 15 versions.
And it reads right here, assuredly, my Lord will give you a sign of his own accord. Look, the young woman is with child and about to give birth to a son. Let her name him Emmanuel. And the footnote here, the Emmanuel passage, Isaiah provides a sign, the point of which is either to clarify his message, which has to be clarified at that point in time, or to verify it. It is not clear whether the sign is the woman's pregnancy, the child's birth, his name, or his diet, nor is it clear when the sign comes to pass. Immediately, if the sign is his name, soon birth, or several years into the future. Young woman, Hebrew Alma. The Septuagint translates as virgin, leading ancient and medieval Christians to connect this verse to the New Testament figure of Mary. All modern scholars, however, agree that the Hebrew merely denotes a young woman of marriageable age, whether married or unmarried, whether a virgin or not. You will find many translations today, not just, this is the Jewish Publication Society out of Oxford, so it's the academic JPS. But you'll find many texts today that will no longer translate Alma, because the Hebrew word for virgin is Betula. Again, I don't know what the similar Arabic words might be, or if there is a distinction in Arabic between words that are similar. But while I understand what you're saying, it then ultimately, for New Testament fulfillment of prophecies, it's very important then, if this is going to be a prophecy to be filled in Christian scriptures, that it remain virgin. But it's not what God said. Let me give you one more example that might be, because it's common knowledge. So the last of the 10 utterances, the last of the 10 commandments, do any of you know what it is? You shall not, or thou shalt not, to use the old English, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's, whole list of things, all pieces of property. If you look at the 10 commandments in Exodus, the wife is thrown in with all the property. In Deuteronomy, the wife is separated from the rest of the property. So already our tradition asks, the obvious question for us as Jews is, why the difference between the two? Was it now because Moses is sharing God's words with the people? Why does Moses say it a little differently than it was in the Exodus text? Is it possible that Moses already understands that women are not to be seen as property similar to all the other property? Your neighbor's ox or his ass or his maidservant or his male servant, and the list goes on. Is there a difference already that we understand? Because originally when God created man and woman, God created man and woman, as we understand the biblical text, equally. In chapter 1 of Genesis, not the woman subserviently to the man in chapter 2 of Genesis. But the bigger question I would suggest to you is the word covet. So what does covet mean? Anybody? Desire. Okay. Probably if I were to push you on covet, it means more than desire. To desire intensely. Almost so intensely that you can't control, right, that desire itself. But if you look at all of the other utterances or the commandments, they're all very specific. They talk about actions. They don't talk about feelings. Take the ones that are very specific. You shall not murder. Right? You shall not take God's name in vain. What does it mean, covet? How can you not help coveting? There are times, and I'm going to admit to my own imperfections and sins. So I'm a man of a certain age. As Dr. Shah knows, I drive a Chevy Malibu. All right. I have to admit, there are times I see a red Chevy Corvette and I go, for that one moment, I think of how wonderful it would be to sit in that car on an open road, and I can't help it. I never act on it. I never have acted on it. I hope I will never act on it. But for a passing moment, a bit of covetousness floats through my being. What does it mean then to covet? How can I stop feelings? I can work at trying to control them, but sometimes I feel something that just, it happens. It's so hard to do that. And so one of the ways you have to try to figure out what the Hebrew means is to look at where that Hebrew word is used in context in other places. And so if you go through the entire Tanakh, especially the Torah, and you look at tachmod, which is the Hebrew word there, it almost seems to have to do with taking when something is open to take. In one of the earlier places it's used, it appears when someone goes away for a period of time. And I think to myself, oh, my neighbor is away. I can go over and use his maidservant or male servant to get my work done. Or I can use some of his land because he's away. What will he know if he's away? And I just use it and pretend when he gets back. That's what it seems when you look at this word in context in other places, it seems to mean. So by translating it as covenant, we've misled ourselves in English in terms of what it means. Translation is very, very hard, and it can mislead us in terms of how we understand the text. And we in the Western world, beautiful as the King James Version is, and it's absolutely beautiful English in terms of its rhythm in places and its rhyme, and how for generations of Americans, it kind of, I can stand here and I can start reciting sections. The 23rd Psalm. Any Jew or Christian in America over the age of 60 can recite it by heart. But it doesn't mean necessarily what we say it means. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What does it mean, I shall not want? I can go, I hope that begins to answer what you're asking.
And about the Genesis, it's mentioned about the Zamzam well also. It mentions about Hagar, Ishmael.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking about, and I'm glad you raised it. I was talking about the Jewish tree, how we see our descent. But you're absolutely right about Ishmael and Hagar. Now, you're asking, in some ways you're asking me what for me is a very troubling question. How do I understand Ibrahim, who we are all the children of Abraham, all the children of Ibrahim. Now this is very hard for me because I want to do this in a careful way. As I read the biblical text, for me in Genesis, Abraham is a very troubling character. Abraham does things which trouble me. Abraham does things to Hagar and to Ishmael, which I believe he still learns how to be a better father and a better husband. Maybe that's the safest way I can put it. There are parallels to how Abraham treats Hagar and Ishmael and the way Abraham treats Sarah and Isaac. In ways that somehow it is as if Abraham is trying to ensure the deaths of both of his sons. He sends Ishmael out into the wilderness with Hagar to die of thirst. And he's taking Isaac away from his mother to offer him as a sacrifice atop the mountain. He doesn't tell Sarah, in a sense also causing her death. What does that say to me about the person that we see perhaps, and this is another conversation, the first monotheist, the first monolith?
Monolatry.
Monolith. The other word that well, we can talk about those definitions later on. What does it say to me about Abraham? And what is it then about God? What is God trying to test Abraham for? I'm convinced, and this is me speaking as I engage with the text. And for me, the text, and this is where when I engage with the text, it's not just the black letters on the white parchment. It's also the spaces between the words and the spaces between the letters that I have to engage with. Because the text is given to me, as you know, without punctuation, without chapter and verse that was imposed later on. I have to try to figure it out. What is it that God is saying? So in short, for me with Abraham, God has to test the man. How can Abraham become the father of